According to a bill introduced last month, Ontario wants schools to focus more on reading, writing, and arithmetic. It also wants the Ministry of Education in a position to direct school boards and help plan the curriculum that will deliver those objectives. With us for their take on this overhaul, let's welcome Kathy Abraham, President of the Ontario Public School Boards Association and a trustee in the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, headquartered in Peterborough. And Mike Ramsay is here, a trustee in the Waterloo Region District School Board, and we're grateful to have you two with us here tonight on TVO. Kathy, to you first. Reaction to the minister's interview. What'd you hear that you liked? What'd you hear you didn't like?
Well, the good news is school boards and school board trustees have always been focused on student achievement as well as well-being. So we have no difficulty at all with focusing on student achievement because we're already doing it. We have some concerns about the legislation, about the details of the legislation, about the loss of our ability to make local-based decisions, that we aren't a one-size-fits-all province, and we need to be able to have some flexibility in these decision-making so that we reflect the communities we live in, because we are the locally elected school board
I hear
trustees.
you, but he did acknowledge that in the interview. He did say what's good for Northwestern Ontario may not work in downtown Toronto.
I understand that. Devil's in the details, as always.
As always.
And, you know, while we have had seen the papers or the legislation, we were not consulted with prior to the legislation being interviewed, and we really need to have some meaningful consultation on what exactly it looks like.
Okay. Mike, how about to you? What'd you like, what didn't you like?
Well, to start, I do believe Bill 98 is a step in the right direction in terms of some of the challenges that boards have been facing over the last little while around student learning and achievement. Unfortunately, the experience at many boards is that trustees have not been focused on that and have that inability so far to hold directors of education accountable for the outcomes. So to that end, I think the minister is a move in the right direction. When we have, in Waterloo Region alone, 4,000 kids, 4,000 elementary age students being educated in the equivalent to homeschooling in pods, that's telling us, that's a huge message being delivered to elected trustees that they're not delivering on what parents want.
Is that
and when they do come to the board to make their concerns known and to ask questions, they're met with vexatious challenges by many boards of education, and I think that's why the minister has stepped in. It's a step in the right direction. There are some things that needs to be tweaked, but I do believe it is a step in the right direction, and it's responding to the concerns of many parents and many of the parents that I'm hearing from.
What needs tweaking?
Well, I think where my colleague and I probably would agree is that with respect to how we handle real estate, for example, I think we could find some common ground on that, because I think boards are most well positioned to deal with real estate with a futuristic view. Okay, so 30 years from now, Mr. Lecce would not be around as an education minister. He'll be alive, but not around as a minister of education, perhaps.
You never know. He's had the job for a long time.
But boards would be grappling to find, we're not making any more land, so it'd be grappling with basically finding spaces to put students. I mean, we're attracting more immigrants and so forth, so that could probably be walked back and tweaked. But in terms of the focus on student learning and achievement, I'm with the minister on that.
Okay, let me come back to that issue of the real estate later, because we did talk about that, as you heard, and he doesn't quite share your view on that, needless to say. But let me focus on the consultation, because you said you did not get a heads up before this bill was introduced. Is that right?
We did see it. There's a difference between just being shown what the bill is and being consulted with. And we certainly saw it, but there was no in-depth consultation. Mike is right. For instance, the conversation on the land use and surplus properties, we would certainly have liked to have the opportunity to talk about our concerns about what we can and cannot do with the property that we own.
Let me jump in. Hang on a sec, Kathy.
That.
I want to jump in on that, because you heard him say that in his experience, what tends to happen in these real estate plays is that you folks focus way too much on local power and turf battles as opposed to the bigger picture here. And his view is, I'm bringing the bigger picture into play here. Your response.
Fair enough, but I think my bigger picture is a little bit different than his bigger picture.
For sure.
We plan, a colleague recently said to me, and it's perfectly explained, we plan in 13-year cycles. So we're already planning for that child that's entered in our school in junior kindergarten. We're already planning for what's happening to them in 13 years. So sometimes, and I'll use the Toronto experience because we are in Toronto, the minister's right. The Toronto District School Board has property that they've leased out to somebody else because right now they don't need it. But they know that in 10, 15 years, they're going to need it. And so if we sell it or if we're not using it, if we're not allowed to keep it so that we can use it later, where are they going to buy more property? Where are they going to be able to put a school when we need it? And the experience across Ontario is a little bit different, but again, the same. We may not have an empty school sitting there, but there are school boards in this province that might have a hunk of land, and they're hanging on to it because they see the growth coming, and they know that in 10 or 12 or 15 years, we're going to need that piece of property.
So this is short-sighted on the minister's view. Do you agree with that, Mike?
Well, what I would be suggesting is that I think if the minister is talking about giving boards the expanded ability to do as what my colleague is saying around being able to lease spaces out to others until we need it, that's not a bad look. Where if the minister is, however, going in the direction of short-term gain in terms of saying, here's where you can find some money, and then we don't have to raise provincial taxes to give you money that you can just be selling the real estate. But it's a double-edged sword, and I talk about when I talk about student learning and achievement, is that it ties into that in the sense that in Waterloo region alone, and the minister would have the numbers better than I would, but I'm hearing 4,000 elementary age students earn the equivalent to pods. That's roughly $48 million that's not going into public education.
When you say pods, like you mean portables?
Basically, no.
No. What do you mean?
The equivalent to homeschooling. But it's just parents getting together, having schools in church basements.
Gotcha.
Okay, because the public education system is not delivering something that they want. So they're voting with their feet. We have to find ways to address that.
Gotcha. Okay. You want to come in on that?
Yeah, so I would just say that that's not the number we're hearing, but we do know that that number did increase after pandemic. I mean, and there are a number of parents still in this province who are anxious and nervous about sending their children back to school, not because of the lack of education or the quality of education, but they're still having concerns about COVID. And so we would push back on that and by just saying that it isn't a homeschooling for education reasons versus public schools. It's about families feeling physically safe as far as COVID's concerned. And I don't, again, I'm going to say I'm not sure that's not quite what we've heard as numbers-wise. We do know what happens. So the answer is not full-scale change everything. The answer is help us, help those people feel safe.
Okay, let me circle back, though, to the top of our conversation where you seem to be saying at the beginning, Kathy, I'm delighted that the minister has talked about this back to basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. We've been doing all that. We're focused on student achievement already as it is. And your position, Mike, was more along the lines of, well, I'm glad he's dipped his oar in this water because, frankly, we're not sure that this is being done as well as it ought to be done. Do I see a point of departure here between the two of you?
So I think language matters. Language matters. And I think the concern for us is when you talk about going back to basics, what people hear is reading, writing, and arithmetic. I'm of an age that's what we used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. You know, life is far more complex now, that our kids need more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. In fact, on the subway in Toronto this morning, I was in the subway and these young people got on the subway and one young fella sat down and immediately fell asleep. And I thought, you know, this is where my brain goes. I think, okay, is he just a 17-year-old teenage boy who's tired all the time, because they are? Or did he have to work last night because he helps keep his family in food? Or perhaps are they homeless? And going back to reading, writing, and arithmetic does not help students like that. We know that there are real challenges in our schools right now with mental health. There are challenges in our schools in this province with poverty. And I continue to say that if a child or a student is coming to school in the morning and their big worry is, where am I going to sleep tonight? All the reading, writing, and arithmetic in the world doesn't help that kid succeed.
Oh, fair enough.
So we need to expand our focus on not just the basics. Our kids don't live in a basic world.
Mike.
And I do believe the basics are very important. When we have, especially like say in my district, I can speak about Waterloo Region District School Board. When we have a school, for example, I'll just give one example. We have a school where the student population, the provincial standard for reading, only 22% of the kids are meeting it. For math, it's like 39%, writing 32%. We have a problem. The rest of the world that we will be competing with, they don't really care much about whether it's Green Shirt Day or Jamaican Jerk Chicken Day. What they're concerned about is, what are the deliverables? How can we improve student learning and achievement to prepare them for the real world?
But can you improve student learning and achievement if kids are coming to school hungry, tired, nervous?
Well, you know what? I think those are obviously things that has to be addressed. Is it the responsibility of the education system? I'm not so sure. I think we should focus on what our priorities are. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that we shouldn't be communicating to the ministry or to different levels of government the issues around hunger and homelessness. That by no means. It's no different than the other challenges that boards face with concerns around LGBTQ rights, for example. But when we look at what went on in Halton Region, that's making a mockery of our LGBTQ friends and neighbors.
You are referring to
the Halton District School Board and
the teacher who showed up wearing, I don't know, is that what you're referring to?
Prosthetic, that is what I'm referring to.
Prosthetic breasts, okay.
I'm saying that those are sideshows, and it distracts from what the primary focus of boards of education should be, and that is student learning and achievement.
I should ask you about that, Kathy, because I appreciate what you're saying. Life's more complicated than the 3 R's these days. There's no doubt about that. And the fact does seem to be that we're asking school boards and schools all across the province to do everything these days, not just reading, writing, arithmetic, but solve poverty, solve hunger, solve mental health crises, do parenting, do civics, do everything. You can't do everything. So you have to prioritize, presumably, right? What do you prioritize?
We prioritize our students.
No, but what does that mean?
Well, I will say I believe that. I believe that we do. The good news is that the Education Act says that our job is student achievement and well-being. The well-being part is already in the Education Act. So this is what we do. What do we prioritize? We prioritize whatever that student needs. I know that people say, my colleague uses the example of being able to focus and you don't care about Jerk Chicken Day.
But he doesn't care. He doesn't see that as a priority.
That's not your priority. But if you are a child who doesn't see themselves reflected in that school at all, and you come to school and you say, nobody in this school cares about who I am, where I've come from, what my experience is, and all of a sudden, that day is about Jamaican heritage, that might matter to that child, and that might be the thing that makes that child feel welcome and might help them learn better. It is complex. It is so complex and is so much more than it used to be. And I understand what you're saying, but we do prioritize. We never lose sight of the fact that the students need to be educated so that they can make the choices they want to make after they leave our system. And despite, and I actually did hear the minister say that we've been doing a good job. We have done a good job. We, every board meeting, and I know it's the same at Waterloo District School Board, we are there focusing on how to make things better for kids.
But it sounds like, Mike, you're saying somewhere along the way, we've lost the plot a little bit as well.
I do believe we've lost the plot for a little bit in terms of, and I'm not even suggesting that we shouldn't have those conversations about kids seeing themselves in different roles and so forth. The bottom line is that that's an ongoing conversation, and there are many opinions, and those need to get discussed. And it can't be where we have one group or boards of education elevating one group and saying, well, this is what they're saying, and this is what's going to happen going forward. And if you don't agree, you're transphobic, and if you don't agree, you're a white supremacist. I was called a white supremacist by many people that my colleagues on the Waterloo Region District School Board listen to and take counsel from in developing policy. We have a problem there because then we're losing focus. student learning and achievement, and there are many different ways as to how we can strike that balance. I think about, and I'm going back a little bit in history, of the role of the former premier. I saw his picture of the former premier, Bill Davis, and in his role as an education minister back in the 60s. Real solutions for real people in terms of, I can't even remember the name of the district, it was somewhere down in Chatham, where there was still segregation, for example. And he went down and he dealt with it. He got the fix and he dealt with it. And to turn around today, in 2023, and say we are going to defend having segregation in our schools and call it affinity spaces or whatever you want to, what label you want to put on it. I see that there's a problem with that, and there are many in the community, diverse communities that feel the same way.
I get you. I'm getting back to the bill now. Okay, let's okay. One of the provisions of this bill does call for the hiring of more teachers in order to do what teachers do. Kathy, I wonder if you think the numbers in there are adequate to the task.
We already have a little bit of a teacher shortage. We already are struggling with making sure there's teachers in front of every classroom every day, as particularly in French language. It's more so from our French language board colleagues, but even in our own schools where there's French immersion. We're going to have issues finding tech teachers, teachers who are qualified to also teach welding, for instance. So it's a lofty goal, and we'll never say no to more support. Don't misunderstand that. I'm just not really sure where they're going to come from. I'm not sure that there needs to be some more work on the other end to get people interested in coming to join us as teachers. We will never say no to having more teachers in classrooms or having those kinds of supports in our schools to support these kids. I kind of agree with some of the things that the Bill Davis, I forget the words you used about, it's about real things that are happening in our schools, and that's what we deal with. Again, I come back to education being a complex issue, and hiring teachers is just one part of it.
Sure. Mike, I want to put to you, if I can, one of the questions I put to the minister, which is that this government appears to have, I'm not judging it, I'm just pointing it out, appears to have a real focus on training, on making sure that the education kids get eventually leads to some kind of career, as opposed to other approaches which have been taken in the past, which speak to the whole child, which speak to creating critically thinking citizens, as opposed to training people specifically for jobs. Do you have a concern about that?
I think, again, it is a step in the right direction, because I think what has taken hold in education in Ontario over the last number of years is that we should just be training kids to get to college and university and ignoring the trades. And that's why I felt so refreshed and felt so good when I saw the minister actually meeting with the Minister of Education from Germany, I think Baden State in Germany. I've visited Germany, I've seen their education system, and I think it's something that we should be modeling here in Ontario. We want to have good citizens that can think critically. And I think for the most part, in some of our schools, that is being done. In some of our schools, it's not happening. And I think that's what the minister is focusing on. We need to have, it's been said that anything that gets measured gets done. So that's why I strongly support, for example, the board improvement plans and how that's going to be tightened up with respect to the EQA scores, matching it, and holding directors of education accountable for the outcomes. Because once directors are held accountable, boards will then do their jobs and not be distracted by the sideshows that, as I mentioned, that taken place in Halton Region, and using codes of conduct to shut down legitimate debates. Those are all things that Bill 98 is dealing with, or intends to deal with, and I find it refreshing. It is a step.
What about your power? You know, this is, I mean, some will argue this is a bit of a power grab by the province into legitimate authority that you as a trustee and that boards as constitutionally recognized entities in this province and country ought to have authority over. What do you say to that? Well,
school boards, as any form of local government, are creatures of the provincial government. That's one. Number two, the other part of it is that I think the minister more than likely is responding to the concerns that he's certainly hearing from across the province, parents are upset. I've never seen parents so upset where security and police are being called to board meetings simply because parents are there asking legitimate questions and they're met with vexatious challenges, and board gets distracted in dealing with those challenges, operational decisions, as they call it, that are really political decisions in disguise. And then we're distracted and we cannot hold directors of, we don't have the time then to hold directors of education accountable for the outcomes.
Kathy, let me give you the last minute on that. Whether you see this at all as a kind of a power grab on what ought to be your responsibility.
So school board trustees are the longest, you know this, the longest serving form of elected government in Ontario and in fact in Canada. And many years ago, people thought the school boards and local decision making was important. I will disagree with my colleague, respectfully disagree with him on some of the things that he has said. We need to pay attention to the minority rights. And when parents come in and are asking us to do things that perhaps contravene things like the Ontario Human Rights Code, we have no choice but to respect and support and keep safe our minority students, whether that be because of race or culture or LGBTQ or any of those things. We have to protect the safety of those students. And yes, our school board meetings have become contentious because we have an issue in this society right now where we're struggling to find our place about equity. And we will not lose sight of that. Student achievement is incredibly important, but if we lose sight of the importance of the differences of our kids, we will lose sight of student achievement.
I want to thank both of you for coming into TVO tonight and sharing your views. Kathy Abraham from the Ontario Public School Boards Association, Mike Ramsay, a trustee at Waterloo Region District School Board. I know you both drove a long way to get here, so we're truly grateful for the effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.